What is up, Ravens flock? Huge shout out for your support for the 410 Sports Talk. Chance and Glenn are the best in the business. They're killing it right now. They love talking Raven talk. Make sure you go subscribe to their channel. Let's go Ravens. Big trust.
What is going on, Ravens flock? Welcome back to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin here with James Haskell. And this episode, we're going to discuss who might end up being left out when this final roster spot is set at the wide receiver position. A lot of guys right now competing for the few spots in the wide receiver room. So we're going to get into who, it's a little early. We're going to get into who we think will ultimately be left off the roster when those cuts are made come end of August, early September. But before we get into it, give us a subscribe, give us a like, hit the notification bell, and we will keep you up to date on all your Ravens news. So, Jimbo, there's a few locks, and then there's a few hopefuls, actually more than a few hopefuls. And this wide receiver room has got a lot more competition, especially now after free agency, at least the initial part, and after the draft. This room is getting awfully crowded, and the Ravens might have to cut some guys that are recent picks, or I'm not sure. They're not going to keep, or they might have to keep more than we've ever seen them keep, Jimbo.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because there's a few things to consider, like you're talking about. If I'm not mistaken, at least in recent history, and we looked back, the past 3 years, the most they've kept is 6. And in some cases, they've only kept 5. So we're going to use 6 as, in our example here, as the threshold of making the team or not. So we'll give the guys the best chance possible. And the other thing we're going to do here is we're going to rank them not on likely to make the team, but where we see them as far as depth chart goes. And we're going to do that one at a time here. There might be some surprises, ladies and gentlemen. But before we do all that, let's just name the guys that we consider to be in range of making the top 6, right? So Glenn, do you have the guys there? Know who they are that you can give to us?
Yes, I do. So we have Marquise Hollywood Brown. We have, Devin Duvernay. We have James Crochet, Miles Boykin. We have Sammy Watkins, new to the group. Tyler Wallace. We have, Dion Kane. We have Ben Victor.
Rashad
Bateman. And we have Jalen Moore. Currently on the Ravens depth chart as it stands. Unless I missed somebody, I think that was all of them. Let's see. Hollywood, Watkins, Bateman, Duvernay, Wallace, Boykin, Crochet, Kane, Victor, and Moore are the current guys competing.
Yeah, and those are the guys who we consider to be in range.
Yeah.
Right, of this. And so if you count them up, that's 10. 2 hands.
That's
10
too
guys.
many.
Right, so... Yeah, we're not keeping 10. We aren't keeping 9, 8, 7. Max, we're keeping 6.
And let me just go back how we got to that 6 number, Jimbo. That way everybody knows. In 2020, this is the names that made the squad at the start of the year. We had Willie Snead, Marquise Brown, Miles Boykin, Chris Moore, Devin Duvernay, and James Crochet. That was in 2020. In 2019, we had Marquise Brown, Miles Boykin, Willie Snead, Seth Roberts, Chris Moore, and Jaleel Scott. And then in 2018, had Willie Snead, Michael Crabtree, John Brown, Chris Moore, Jordan Lastly, and Tim White. And boy, as I'm reading these lists, that is a brutal. In 2018, Jimbo, we had Snead, Crabtree, John Brown, Chris Moore, Jordan Lastly, and Tim White. I mean, is there any wonder that Joe Flacco had struggles in his last year? Holy smokes, that's a tough room.
Yeah, you're not kidding. That is brutal. But we are really hopeful that the room will start to look better, right? After these drives. I know that Eric DaCosta's overhauling that room, man. I mean, overhauling. So let's go through, Glenn, and name from depth chart wise, 1 all the way down. There might be some surprises, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start, and I think that right now, as it stands, a lot of people want to put Rashad Bateman as our number 1 wide receiver. I don't think you can starting week 1. I think as of today, Hollywood Brown is a lock for this team and is our number 1 wide receiver. So that's my number 1. Who's your number 1?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's Hollywood. Now, depending on, it's not saying he's our number 1 in the sense of he's going to be playing outside receiver for us. He's going to be, I'm sure, primarily going to be used on the inside, but he'll be used inside, outside, a bunch of different places, and he might not end up being the number 1, but right now, because of his success on the team, because he's a go-to guy for his best friend and Lamar Jackson, I think you got to put him as number 1, the lock. That's it. He gets the most targets in the receiver room by far up to this point. So yeah, I agree with you. He's number 1. Now, as far as number 2 goes, this could have differing opinions here, but to me, I'm going to go with the vet, the new guy to the room who's been, we've been practicing with Hollywood, with Lamar, with JK, and with Mark Andrews, and that's Sammy Watkins. I think he's the old elder statesman in the room at just 27 years old, but he's a guy that brings playoff and Super Bowl experience to the team. He's played in big games. So he's the number 2 who could very well end up being the number 1 or could be lower than that by year's end. But right now he's my number 2. Who you got?
Yeah, I'm with you here. My number 2 is also Sammy Watkins. I'm looking for him to have a great year this year, have a little bit of a resurgence, even in that number 2, maybe number 3 role. Looking for him to make some big plays. So yeah, I don't think Sammy Watkins at this point today can be any lower than 2. Now look, we've gone 1 to 2, and I know you guys are probably scratching your heads, you're yelling at the screen or whatever. Where's Rashad Bateman?
Mm-hmm.
Where's Rashad Bateman? But this is as of today. 2-3 weeks into 4 weeks in, quarter way through the season, these numbers could change, but our depth chart as of today, nothing is given. It's all earned. So my number 3 is where the sliding stops for old Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman is my number 3 receiver, locked to make this team like the other 2, of course, as our number 1 pick in the first round. So I'm going to go with Rashad Bateman, number 3. You?
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I would not be shocked at all if he's the number 1 receiver by mid-season or even sooner. I think he's got the highest ceiling of all the guys, and with his polished route tree already being established, before he even comes in the door, I think that makes it that much more likely he gets on the field and produces earlier even than most rookies. Of course, you can't produce much earlier than Hollywood did his first year because he was catching bombs right off the break. I think his first catch went for like a 55-yard touchdown. So, but yeah, I think Bateman will ultimately be the primary outside receiver. He showed he can play inside and outside, so I'm sure they'll use him in both areas, but he'll end up being, I think, the primary outside receiver, and obviously has the ceiling to hopefully become the number 1 that Ravens have long been searching for. So then it moves to number 4. And for me, number 4 on this list, I think this is where it starts to get interesting on who you would consider here. To me, it's Devin Duvernay. And the reason is every time we saw the guy have the ball in his hands, he made the most of the play or did even more than I thought, the play was allowing. The guy is such a versatile weapon. They're going to look to get him the ball in a multitude of ways and see what he can do after the ball's in his hands. And obviously he still impacts the game in a big way on special teams. I think he's going to enter the season as the primary punt and kick returner. We saw him take one to the house. And I think that with more opportunity and another full off season under his belt, look for him to become one of the most dangerous return weapons in all of football, especially with this unit, which we know that the head coach takes so seriously and more seriously than a lot of head coaches when it comes to special teams. So for me, it's Devin Duvernay in the 4th spot. Who you got?
Yeah, mine is also Devin Duvernay. So we agree on that front thus far. And like you said, definitely where it starts to get interesting. The one thing I'll mention, you talked about the offseason. This will be his first, unless I'm missing something, this will be his first actual offseason with the Ravens, where last year was so riddled by the changes of COVID-19, where this year there are some adaptations, but it will be much closer to a normal, if you will, offseason. So I certainly look for him to make a jump this year. And I believe that part of this offense's productivity counts on the ability to continue to get him the ball in unique ways and easy ways for him to, like you're saying, run, be dangerous with the ball in his hands. So 4 was interesting in and of itself. Those guys we all consider to be locks, all consider to be on this roster. I don't think there's anyone that disagrees but would be interested to know if any of you guys disagreed thus far, as far as those 4 being locks on the roster. Okay, so let's go to 5. For me, I'm going right to the Tylenol Wallace. That's right. Tylen Wallace, I think, is our number 5 receiver. He led the country in contested catches last year. Pretty incredible. Eric DeCosta talked about this in his interview on the lounge. Shout out to Garrett Downing, who we had on the show. He talked about how the Ravens analytics team put together their top 10 receivers, and both Rashad Bateman and Tylen Wallace were in their top 10 outside receivers, and so I think that he is a lock to make this team, and the Ravens were happy to see him slide. And I think he's our number 5 receiver as of today in the depth chart.
Yeah, and I agree with you. He's number 5 for me. Recent draft pick, just this year, no chance he's left off the roster. But more importantly, you talk about a home run threat on the outside, a guy that can, take any play and turn it into a touchdown. He had a 1.1% drop rate, which was second in the country last season, and really 3 years of incredible productivity in college, which I think just shows the consistency, liability that this guy is going to bring, the competitive toughness, the strength with the ball in his hands. I mean, there's a lot to like about Tylen Wallace. And a guy, it's funny, we want the big guy, but he's only 5'11", but boy, he plays like he's 6'3". And so I'm confident that he's going to do well, and I'm excited to see the kind of player he can turn into. So we got 5 on the roster now, Jimbo. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I went over the fact that they only keep 6. That's what they're keeping. And there's no reason to expect in this offense that we're ever going to go to 7. I think, if anything, it's more likely that they could keep just 5 rather than them going and extending it to 7. So 6 is really hard. So right now, competing for that spot, in my opinion, I think Jalen Moore, he's listed on the roster right now, but I'm not so sure what his chances really are at making the team. I think he's more of a practice squad type of guy, and that may end up seeing time if there's a rash of injuries at the position. But to me, to actually make the team, you're talking about Miles Boykin, to my James Crochet, Ben Victor, and Dion Kane, right? If I'm missing someone, fill me in. But to me, it's 4 guys competing for one really pivotal spot. Now, Miles Boykin, while we've been hard on this show, Jimmy, we and the reason is because we were so high when we saw him come out. I remember going and seeing him at camp and being so impressed about, just looking at him. He looked like the biggest and he looked like the big grown man in the room. And then he ended up, not really living up to that hype, in my eyes when he got on the field. I thought he was a guy that plays a little smaller than he should. And when you're known for your blocking as a wide receiver, that's a problem in my opinion. Yeah. So, but he's a 3rd-round pick a couple years ago, and I think that influences the decision-making because the guys who were in control of cutting and signing and cutting guys are the same guys that drafted him. And so, there's that part that influenced. Then you have James Crochet, who, I think had a tough offseason. He didn't have an offseason last year in his rookie year. And so it's got to be tough for a guy like that to come in, learn the offense, and be able to be productive when you have no offseason, you have no preseason, you have no, so I think he was behind the 8 ball, and that may have been a reason why we didn't see more of him on the field, but he proved to be a valuable returner. And I think if Devin Duvernay were to go down, who's your return guy? So you got to factor that in. And then, of course, the 2 futures, Dion Kane and Ben Victor, who admittedly we don't know a ton about because we haven't seen a bunch of them. I know that there's a lot of people who are high on both of these guys and think that they can kind of have a resurgence here. But it's going to be tough for them because of the fact that their futures, they weren't on the roster and they weren't draft picks. So Jimmy, I'm going to kick it to you.
Oh, I knew it.
Because I don't want to keep filibustering, and I want to know who you pencil in right now today on May 8th or May 9th? Who's your 6th receiver, Jimbo?
Oh gosh.
It's not easy.
No, it's funny because when we were going in, I had an answer, and then I went back and I flip-flopped. I'm going with my first answer. My first, James Crochet is going to be the guy.
Okay.
And it was hard for me because I thought, Miles is also does things on special teams while he's not a returner. He's a gunner and he's relatively productive. He's a good blocker, and he's unique in that he's the only guy that's Sammy's 6'2".
Yeah.
and he's our tallest receiver.
Yep.
Boykin is a solid 6 feet, every bit of 6'4".
Mm-hmm.
And so he's physically different than the rest of the guys, where James is just like the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
5 foot and change, thinking that they're 6, wishing they were 6 foot, right? As my light turns off, there goes. That's like Boykin's tenure with the Ravens. Just but I think that the difference will be, goodness gracious, are you going
to be in the dark?
Yeah, the difference will be that they've already seen what they want, what they can see out of Boykin. And James hasn't had a fair shake, is what I think it will come down to. So I'm going with James Crochet as our sixth guy. Now, before you tell me who yours is, the only thing I could say, I was thinking of to counter that is if we kept, who's more likely to be on the practice squad?
Right. That's a big factor.
You see what I'm saying? So, because I don't know if they would both make it. I don't know what your thoughts are there. But that's also something to consider. But I'm going to say James is our number 6. What about you?
And I think that's a big factor. And I want to, like I said earlier, we're hard on Miles. And I think that maybe we're not giving him enough of a pass on the lack of offseason last year that we were given to the other guys. We were given a big pass to Crochet and a big pass to Duvernay because it was their rookie years. But it was also Miles, freshman to sophomore year, first to second year, which is when the players are supposed to make their biggest leap. But at the same time, and also we have the new coaches, and really, if he's getting quality time with T. Martin and with Keith Williams, maybe he can have an all of a sudden breakthrough in his career, like we saw at Notre Dame. It took him till his last year at Notre Dame to have that breakthrough. So maybe this is the year that with the new coaching staff that he has a breakthrough or something like that, and he becomes the player that we were hoping he would be.
Oh boy.
So for that reason, Jimbo, I'm going to say Miles Boykin is the 6th spot. And you touched on my other reason. I feel like it's much easier to slide Crochet through to the practice squad because, like you mentioned, you can't teach 6'4" with 4.4 speed. You just can't teach that kind of stuff. So I'm hopeful, but I'm worried that they'd lose Crochet because Crochet showed you how valuable he is a punt returner. I mean, he is so valuable that, we're not the only team that could have a guy that just on the roster just because they need a guy who can consistently go back there and catch punts. Well, what if that guy gets hurt and, you name the team, Detroit loses its punt returner. They don't want to stick a guy back there who they don't have confidence in. Well, they could see, and we know that guy can come over and catch punts for us. And stealing a guy and sign him to your roster when you're only asking him to do that is a lot more likely than taking a guy that's not been with your team and asking him to go in there and run routes for you because he doesn't know the offense. But if all he has to do is go back there and catch punts, he can be a day one contributor as soon as you sign him over from the other team's practice squad.
Yeah.
So I'm worried that we would lose him, but I'm not so sure Boykin would make it through only because of the intent, the stuff you can't teach, the height,
see
weight,
it on
speed.
paper and you're like, well, I'm taking this guy, giving him a shot.
Right. And they might have loved him. It might have been a GM that loved him coming out and was hopeful they could get him. And they could say, man, he was in the Ravens offense. They struggled developing receivers. You bring him over here with our guys and we can turn this guy into a player. So I just think that Boykin, and he was a recent 3rd round draft pick, whereas Crochet was a 6th round draft pick. That's a big, big difference there as far as what you're expecting to get on the field from those two spots. So, I'm not necessarily thrilled about it because I've been so bummed out by Boykin and how he's played. And I'm not sure, even if you have the best coaching, if you can teach a guy to go up and high point a ball and play to his size, or, I don't know if that's just something that's instinctual. Or if that's something that can be learned. In my opinion, I think it's more instinctual. It's more either you got it or you don't. But who knows when it comes to that? And I think that Ben Victor and Dion Kane, they would have to really show out. They would have to come out and dominate in a preseason game, or just completely dominate the one-on-ones and all the physical practices that they do in training camp. They would have to absolutely show out to make the team, because if not, I think it's pretty easy to say you could slide those guys. You could even hide them in preseason. Say they are playing really well in practice. You could hide them a little bit in preseason, let them play with the 3rd string quarterback who ain't getting the ball out that good, and maybe, hide them and get them through the practice squad without guys really seeing them that much. So I think it ends up being Boykin, Jimbo, and I'm not necessarily thrilled about it, but that's how kind of my line of thinking got me there.
Yeah, I could totally see it going both ways. I feel like you and I both kind of articulated the reasons we like our guys, but also the reasons why, from a strategic standpoint, it could go the other way. So I can totally see your points there. And it's going to be so interesting to see what happens. Competition is what the Ravens and John are all about. So I cannot wait. Who would have thought that I would be this excited about who gets the 6th spot for the Baltimore Ravens? Like, Baltimore Ravens receiver group. So it's going to be really interesting. You guys, give us your 1 through 6. Let us know what your depth chart as of today looks like. Guys, as of today, I think Glenn and I both agree that it is very likely that things switch. For example, Rashad becomes the number 1. Marquise is the number 2. Who knows? Maybe even Tylan Wallace. Yeah, and maybe even Tylan Wallace jumps a Sammy Watkins.
Duvernay or something. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so there's so many things, but give us your depth chart as of today, 1 through 6, no more than 6.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you guys soon.
See you.